March 17, 2004, 9:30 a.m. The Wichita Eagle newspaper offices received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a driver's license belonging to Vicki Wegerle, a 28-year-old woman who'd been found strangled in her home in September 1986. The case had been unsolved for 18 years. Along with the license were 3 photographs taken at the Wegerle crime scene, images that had never been released to the public, images only the killer could possess. At the bottom of one photo, written in neat block letters, was a message. "Do you see the similarities? Can you help?" The letter was signed by someone calling himself Bill Thomas Killman, but investigators immediately recognized who'd sent it. BTK, bind, torture, kill. The serial killer who'd terrorized Wichita in the 1970s and 1980s, murdering at least 7 people, taunting police and media with detailed letters about his crimes, then vanishing in 1991 after killing his 10th victim. 13 years of silence. The case had gone cold. Detectives assumed BTK was dead or imprisoned for another crime. But the package proved he was alive, active, and ready to play his game again. The question was why he'd resurfaced after more than a decade, and whether his need for attention would finally give investigators the opening they needed to catch him. The BTK investigation had begun 30 years earlier, on January 15, 1974, when 4 members of the Otero family were found murdered in their home at 803 North Edgemore in Wichita. Joseph Otero, 38, his wife Julie, 33, and 2 of their 5 children, Joseph Jr., 9, and Josephine, 11, had been strangled. The parents' bodies were found in their bedroom. Joseph Jr. was in his bedroom, a plastic bag over his head. Josephine was found, hanging from a pipe in the basement, partially clothed, evidence suggesting a sexual motive. The killer had cut the phone lines, entered through the back door, and systematically murdered the family with methodical precision. The crime scene was horrifying but organized. Ligatures made from Venetian blind cords, evidence of planning. No signs of panic or frenzy. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was methodical, calculated. The work of someone who'd thought about this carefully. Investigators found semen at the scene, but no sexual assault had occurred, suggesting the killer had masturbated while committing or after completing the murders. The crime stunned Wichita, a conservative Midwestern city where such violence seemed impossible. Months passed with no arrests. Then in October 1974, a letter appeared in a book at the Wichita Public Library. It was a detailed confession to the Otero murders, describing the crimes with disturbing accuracy. At the end, the author explained, "The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK. He'd named himself. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be known. This wasn't just about killing. It was about fame, about being remembered, about playing a game with law enforcement where he held all the cards. BTK struck again on April 4, 1974. He broke into the home of Catherine Bright, 21, intending to kill her alone. But her brother Kevin arrived unexpectedly. BTK shot Kevin twice, but Kevin survived and managed to escape. BTK stabbed Catherine repeatedly, killing her, then fled. Kevin provided a physical description: white male, medium build, wearing aviator glasses. It was the first time anyone had seen BTK and lived. The description went into police databases, but it matched thousands of men in Wichita. Without more specific identifying information, it was virtually useless. BTK went silent for 3 years. Then on March 17, 1977, he struck again. Shirley Vian, 26, a mother of 3, was strangled in her home while her young children were locked in a bathroom. BTK had posed as a telephone repairman to gain entry. Before killing her, he told her children to stay in the bathroom and be quiet, that their mother would be fine. She wasn't. On December 8, 1977, Nancy Fox, 25, was strangled in her home. BTK called police from a payphone afterward, directing them to her address in a calm, matter-of-fact voice. He wanted them to find her quickly. He wanted credit. After the Fox murder, BTK sent a letter to a local television station complaining about the lack of media coverage. "How many people do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" he wrote. The resulting publicity terrified Wichita. Hardware stores sold out of locks and security systems. Women formed neighborhood watch groups. The city was in a state of panic. BTK had succeeded in making himself famous locally, but he wanted more. He wanted national recognition as one of the great serial killers, to be mentioned alongside Ted Bundy and the Son of Sam. The pattern that emerged from BTK's first 7 victims showed a specific methodology. He targeted women who lived alone or were home alone. He stalked them first, learning their routines, determining when they'd be vulnerable. He often posed as a utility worker or repairman to gain entry. Once inside, he'd bind his victims with cords or rope, sometimes torture them, then strangle them manually or with ligatures. The sexual component was present but unusual. He often masturbated at the scene, but didn't always rape his victims. The control, the power, the process of killing was itself sexually gratifying to him. Then BTK vanished. 8 years passed with no known murders, no letters, no contact. Investigators theorized he'd either died, been imprisoned for another crime, or moved away. In 1985, he resurfaced briefly to kill Maureen Hedge, 53, a neighbor. He strangled her in her home, then took her body to his church, where he would later admit he served as congregation president, and photographed her in bondage before disposing of her body under a bridge. In 1986, he killed Vicki Wegerle in her home. In 1991, he killed Dolores Davis, 62, his final victim, strangling her and dumping her body under a bridge outside Wichita. After the Davis murder, BTK went silent again. 13 years. The case went cold. Detectives retired. Evidence sat in boxes. The public moved on. Wichita began to forget. But BTK hadn't stopped thinking about his crimes. He'd simply entered a dormant phase, living his double life successfully, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Dennis Lynn Rader was born March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the eldest of 4 sons. His childhood was unremarkable by serial killer standards. No documented abuse, no obvious warning signs. He grew up in a working-class family, did adequately in school, showed no signs of violent behavior toward animals or other children. The usual markers of future serial killers, the McDonald triad of animal cruelty, bedwetting, and fire setting, were absent. If anything, young Dennis was ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. But inside, Rader was developing elaborate, violent fantasies. He later described being sexually aroused by images of women in danger, by bondage scenarios, by the idea of control and domination. He was deeply uncomfortable with normal sexuality. He couldn't form genuine, intimate connections. Instead, he developed paraphilias, specifically a bondage fetish that eventually fused with homicidal urges. By his teens, he was fantasizing about binding and killing women. By his 20s, he was planning how to make those fantasies real. Rader served in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 1970, stationed in various locations including Japan, Greece, and Alabama. He worked as a mechanic, received an honorable discharge, returned to Kansas. In 1971, he married Paula Dietz. They had 2 children. By all outward appearances, Rader was a model citizen. He worked installing security systems for ADT Home Security. Ironic, given his crimes. He was active in his Lutheran church, eventually becoming congregation president. He was a Cub Scout leader. He coached his children's sports teams. In 1991, he became a compliance officer for Park City, Kansas, a position that gave him authority to inspect properties and issue citations. He enjoyed the power. Rader was living a compartmentalized life. Dennis Rader, the family man, was separate from BTK, the killer. He later described this compartmentalization in detail during his confession. He had different personas, different identities, different modes of being. When he was Dennis, he was a devoted father and husband, a helpful neighbor, a respected community member. When he was BTK, he was a predator stalking victims, planning murders, reliving his crimes through photographs and souvenirs. The two identities didn't conflict in his mind. They coexisted. He felt no cognitive dissonance, no guilt, no remorse. The 2004 resurfacing was triggered by something specific. On January 15, 2004, the 30-year anniversary of the Otero murders, the Wichita Eagle ran a feature story on the case. The article speculated that BTK was probably dead or in prison. Rader later said reading that article really stirred it. His ego couldn't tolerate being forgotten. He needed to prove he was alive, relevant, still dangerous. He needed attention. So he began communicating again, sending packages to media outlets and police, restarting the game he'd paused 13 years earlier. Between March 2004 and February 2005, BTK sent 11 communications to police and media. He sent word puzzles with hidden messages. He sent chapters of an autobiography, much of it fictional. He sent dolls bound in ways that mimicked his murders. He sent jewelry and driver's licenses taken from victims. Each package was a taunt, a challenge, a demand for recognition. And crucially, each communication gave investigators more information to work with. Modern technology that hadn't existed in the 1970s and 1980s, digital forensics, surveillance cameras, DNA analysis, was now available. Lieutenant Ken Landwehr of the Wichita Police Department led the BTK task force. He understood that BTK's need for attention was both his strength and his weakness. Rader wanted to communicate. He wanted dialogue. He wanted to be recognized as important. Landwehr and his team decided to feed that ego, to encourage communication, to make BTK feel like he was in control while slowly gathering evidence that would lead to his identity. Every package BTK sent was processed for DNA, fingerprints, trace evidence. Every communication was analyzed for linguistic patterns. Surveillance cameras were installed at potential drop-off locations. In January 2005, BTK left a package in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot parking lot. The package was a Post Toasties cereal box containing a note asking police a specific question. Can I communicate with floppy disk and not be traced to a computer? Be honest. He wanted to know if sending a floppy disk would be safe, if police could trace it back to him. This question revealed something crucial. BTK didn't understand modern digital forensics. He thought deleting files from a disk made them unrecoverable. He was operating with 1970s technology knowledge in 2005. Landwehr saw an opportunity. He instructed investigators to place a classified ad in the Wichita Eagle with the message BTK had requested. Rex, it will be okay. It was a lie, a trap. But Landwehr gambled that BTK's ego and desire to continue communicating would override any suspicion. Rader later admitted he knew it was risky, but he believed Landwehr wouldn't lie to him. He felt they had a rapport. He thought of them as fellow law enforcement officers engaged in a professional game. His narcissism convinced him he could trust Landwehr's word. On February 16, 2005, a purple Memorex floppy disk arrived at KSAS-TV in Wichita. It contained a document, a letter from BTK continuing his communications. But when forensic computer analysts examined the disk, they discovered something Rader hadn't deleted properly. Metadata from a previous document that had been on the disk and then erased. The metadata showed the last user who'd modified a document on that disk was someone named Dennis. And the document had last been saved at Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Investigators worked quickly. They researched Christ Lutheran Church and discovered the congregation president was a man named Dennis Rader. Surveillance of Rader's home revealed a black Jeep Cherokee in his driveway, matching the vehicle seen in security footage from earlier BTK package drop-offs. But circumstantial evidence wasn't enough for an arrest. Police needed direct physical evidence. They needed DNA. Rader had left DNA at several crime scenes, semen found at the Otero murders and other locations. But Rader had no DNA on file in any database. Investigators couldn't legally compel him to provide a sample without probable cause for arrest. So they found a creative solution. Rader's daughter had recently had a medical procedure at a clinic at Kansas State University. Medical records were sealed, but with a warrant, investigators obtained a tissue sample from her pap smear. They sent it to a forensics lab in Topeka for familial DNA analysis. The results came back positive. The DNA from Rader's daughter was a familial match to DNA found under one victim's fingernails and at other crime scenes. The probability that someone other than Dennis Rader's close relative had left that DNA was astronomically small. Combined with the floppy disk metadata, the vehicle match, and other circumstantial evidence, investigators finally had enough to make an arrest. On February 25, 2005, 9 days after receiving the floppy disk, police arrested Dennis Rader as he drove home from work during his lunch break. Officers pulled him over, ordered him out of his vehicle at gunpoint, handcuffed him. Rader seemed genuinely surprised. When taken to the police station and brought into an interrogation room, he asked calmly, "I assume this is about BTK?" The detective confirmed it was. Rader's first question, "How come you lied to me about the floppy disk? I really thought Ken was honest with me." Landwehr responded matter-of-factly, "Because I was trying to catch you." Rader couldn't comprehend it. He'd believed he and Landwehr had a special relationship, a professional understanding, a bond. The betrayal genuinely shocked him. Throughout the 32-hour interrogation that followed, Rader repeatedly expressed disbelief that police would deceive him. His narcissism had convinced him he was special, that the rules didn't apply to their relationship, that Landwehr respected him enough to be honest. The idea that he'd been manipulated was incomprehensible to his grandiose self-image. But once Rader accepted he'd been caught, he confessed comprehensively. He seemed almost relieved to finally discuss his crimes openly. He described each murder in clinical detail, explaining his methods, his victim selection, his rituals. He showed no remorse. He referred to his victims as projects, describing stalking them as research, killing them as completing the project. He maintained that he'd felt compelled by what he called Factor X, an undefined force inside him that demanded he kill. Psychologists would later identify this as his way of avoiding responsibility, of externalizing his choices as something beyond his control. Rader directed investigators to what he called his mother lode, a locked filing cabinet in his Park City office, containing newspaper clippings about the BTK case, copies of all his communications, photographs of victims, souvenirs including jewelry and underwear taken from victims, and chapters of the autobiography he'd been writing about BTK. He'd kept everything. The narcissist's need to preserve his own legend had created a comprehensive record of his crimes. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. Kansas had abolished the death penalty in 1972 and didn't reinstate it until 1994, so Rader's pre-1994 crimes made him ineligible for execution. On August 18, 2005, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, 175 years minimum, without possibility of parole. Before sentencing, Rader delivered a 20-minute statement the press compared to an Oscar acceptance speech. He thanked his supporters, listed things he had in common with his victims, tearfully admitted his faults, and bizarrely compared his situation to theirs. It was a final performance, a last attempt to control the narrative, to be seen as something other than what he was. The sentencing hearing gave victims' family members their first opportunity to confront Rader directly. They described their pain, their decades of grief, their destroyed families. Many noted that Rader showed no genuine emotion when describing his crimes, but appeared upset when called a coward. His narcissism could tolerate being called a killer, but not being diminished or insulted. He wanted to be seen as intelligent, capable, important. Being called pathetic wounded him more than being called evil. Rader was transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he remains in maximum security. He's given numerous interviews over the years, always maintaining he was driven by forces beyond his control, always positioning himself as a subject of psychological interest rather than a cold-blooded murderer. He maintains correspondence with journalists, criminologists, and true crime enthusiasts. He continues to seek attention, to be relevant, to be remembered. The BTK case fundamentally changed digital forensics in law enforcement. The floppy disk that caught Rader became a teaching example in forensic courses worldwide. It demonstrated that deleted data isn't truly deleted, that metadata can reveal crucial information, that killers who grew up in pre-digital eras often don't understand modern technology's capabilities. It also showed the importance of playing to a suspect's psychology. Landwehr's willingness to lie to Rader, to feed his ego, to make him feel safe communicating, created the opening that ended a 30-year investigation. The 10 confirmed victims of Dennis Rader were Joseph Otero, 38, Julie Otero, 33, Joseph Otero Jr., 9, Josephine Otero, 11, Catherine Bright, 21, Shirley Vian, 26, Nancy Fox, 25, Maureen Hedge, 53, Vicky Vegerle, 28, and Dolores Davis, 62. These were mothers, daughters, sons, people with families and futures. Rader reduced them to projects, to objects, to trophies. He kept their belongings. He fantasized about them. He wrote about them as if they were characters in his story rather than human beings he'd murdered. Dennis Rader's legacy isn't his intelligence or his ability to evade capture for decades. It's his spectacular stupidity at the end, his narcissism so profound that he trusted a police officer's word, that he couldn't conceive of being manipulated, that he believed a floppy disk would be safe because an authority figure told him so. The man who successfully compartmentalized his identity for 30 years, who killed 10 people without leaving usable evidence, who lived a normal suburban life while committing atrocities, was undone by his desperate need for attention and his complete inability to understand that the game he thought he was playing had rules he didn't control. The floppy disk that ended BTK's freedom is now in evidence storage, a small purple Memorex disk containing the metadata that revealed Dennis Rader's identity. It's an artifact of a specific technological moment. Floppy disks were already obsolete by 2005, replaced by USB drives and email. Rader's use of outdated technology revealed his age and his ignorance. A younger killer would have known better. But Rader's ego convinced him he was smart enough to use technology safely, that he understood the risks, that he could trust the police's word. His final mistake wasn't trusting technology, it was trusting himself.